sharing with you all. So this is our social work research, data processing and analysis, a fourth block that we have to discuss today. So here again, there are four units in this block. The first will be dealing with the data processing and analysis, the whole process. Then the second unit will be a little bit about the descriptive statistics. The third unit would be about inferential statistics, and finally the reporting of research, how the reporting in research has to be carried out. Now, exactly, we would be discussing what data processing and analysis is all about. What are these? Why are these important? Now, till now, we have discussed in detail about the various types of research. We have discussed the various designs. We have also discussed, yesterday, we discussed about the various techniques and tools used for data collection. This is the next step after the data is collected. So once you have collected the data through various tools and techniques, how do you proceed after that? How do you come to the inferences? Now, what happened is once the data is collected, the researcher has to shift the attention on the processing part. Okay. And for that, a good plan is required at every stage of the research process. We already know that. And as such, even the processing and analysis of the data also requires planning in advance. And of course, we have to carry out in such a manner as to avoid mistakes, specifically in this particular step of the research. Now, data processing actually it refers to certain operations. Like this will include editing the data, coding the data, computation of the scores, preparation of master charts, etc. So this is all about the data processing. So it will require all these things. Once you have received the data, you have to carry out these processes because it's only after these processes are carried out that you are able to actually come up with certain inference or results. Now, the first part is the editing of the data. After the data is collected through either questionnaires or interview schedules or other entries, now it's not only necessary but also useful in making subsequent steps similar. So once the data is collected, you have to make the steps simpler so that you are able to actually understand what the data presents to you. Sometimes what happens, a researcher may either miss the entries in the questionnaire or he or she may enter some wrong responses. And this lead to some kind of discrepancies. Now, these can be resolved to a great degree once we carry out the editing part. Now, another problem that often comes up at the time of tabulation is when the researcher asks for tabulation of responses from consecutive questions. And in cases where the data are not edited, there generally is you will find some kind of inconsistency in the tabulation. So either the tabulation will not be proper, or you may find some kind of an inconsistency in the data in the tabulation in the tabulated form, and as such this leads to a lot of you can say that discrepancies in the data. Now, in the process of editing, the researcher has to be very careful about the consecutive questions having not applicable as a response. So basically, whatever responses the the individuals are going to give us, we have to be very careful about those responses, and specifically in questions where there have a response which says not applicable. Now, after this, we come to the coding part of the data. Now, coding of the data, it involves assigning a number of response, number to each response of the question. So, whatever question we have, okay, and the responses to those questions, we have to assign a particular number to those responses. Now, the purpose of doing this is basically to translate the raw data into a numerical data, which may be easily counted and tabulated. Okay, now this has to be done very carefully, and the coding scheme will vary depending upon the type of questions. For example, in case of a close-ended questions, they may already be coded, and in that case, it has to be just included in the code book. Whereas when we are dealing with open-ended questions, there we have to involve operations like classification of major responses and developing a response category of others for responses which were not given frequently. Okay, so this has to be done specifically for questions which are open ended. Now, the classification of responses is generally primarily based on similarities or differences among the responses. So we will have to see how similar the responses are, or how different the responses are. Usually, in the case of open-ended questions, in order to classify responses, researchers they have to look for major characteristics of the responses, and depending on the characteristic, we have to put them accordingly. And in case of attitude scales, researchers they have to keep in mind the direction or the weightage of response. So we have discussed in our last class, we were discussing about some of the um, tools and techniques of data collection, in which we have also discussed about the attitude scales and the tests. So, when we are dealing with attitude scales, we have to keep in mind the direction or the weightage of response. So, what is the direction of the response, or what is the weightage of the response in case of an attitude scale? For example, here they have said that in case if the response is strongly agree, then the code would be 5, and the subsequent codes would be in order. And if there is a response like agree or undecided, disagree, strongly disagree, they have to be coded in that manner. Now, uh, a matrix questions they have to be coded taken into consideration each cells as one variable. Okay, now in case now this is basically the kind of uh, the matrix questions which has been given. Now actually we need not dwell much into this, because this is something which is like will not be asked as such, but it's just for the understanding that whenever we are dealing with matrix questions, they have to be coded, take into consideration each cells as one variable. So we will take each cell and we will be giving it a one variable. We'll consider it as one variable. Now, um, now they have explained this by using this given table, how we can consider the matrix questions as one variable. Each cell will be considered as a single variable. Now, after the coding is done, we will be dealing with the master chart preparation. So once the code book is prepared, the data can be transferred either to a master chart or directly to a computer through a statistical package. So this there are a number of packages that are available to us, like you have the SPSS, and there are some other softwares also which can be dealt with, and they make the preparation of the master chart and the later part very easy. So once the coding is done, the data can be transferred to the statistical package or to the master chart. And master chart is basically the manual preparation of the codes. Now, once we go through the master chart to computer is much more going through a master chart to computer is much more advantageous than entering data directly to the computer, because once we are entering the entries in the master chart, we are actually able to check the entries whether if they are wrong or they are right, depending upon by comparing the data listing. Now, entering data directly to the computer is disadvantageous, because then you cannot check the wrong entries. Now, and once they are entered wrongly, then definitely they are bound to give you certain kind of inconsistencies in the later stages of tabulation, which becomes rather difficult. So you have been given this example of how this master chart can be prepared. So the here along the different columns are given to you, and the entries again those columns you can see. So respondent number is there, the age of the respondents, the designation, establishment. Depending upon the codes, we have entered the codes, and accordingly we will prepare the master chart. Now this is just an example. Generally, the master chart which is prepared for researchers are generally quite big. So this is just having 16 entries. So it's just an example of how this master chart is actually prepared. Now, how does the analysis of quantitative data takes place? Now, the purpose of data analysis is basically to prepare the data as a model where relationships between the variables can be studied. Analysis of the data is generally made with reference to the objectives of the study and, of course, the research questions which are there. And at times, it is also designed to test the hypothesis. So analysis of the data would involve recategorization of various of variables, tabulation, explanation, and causal inferences. So whenever we are analyzing the data, we will have to take into consideration the objective of the study and the research question. So we will analyze the data in such a manner that that analysis actually is able to come out um, um, with the research questions as well as the objective of the study. It takes into consideration these two things. And here, the first step of data analysis is a critical examination of the processed data in the form of frequency distribution. So we will be analyzing data after after examining the process data in the form of frequency distribution. So we will come to the various statistical tools later on in the discussion. And this can be done, this analysis is done after examining the frequency distribution. And this analysis is generally made with a view to draw meaningful and precise inferences and generalizations. Now, generally, the process of categorization in accordance with the objectives and hypothesis of the study is arrived with the help of frequency distributions. Now, recategorization of data is again a process where we arrange the categories with the help of statistical techniques. This process, it may involve addition to new category or merging existing categories. So whatever categories are already given to us, either we will add some new categories to it or we will merge the existing categories, and this will lead to recategorization of the already categorized data. Okay, now this is a very important process because it will help us to justify the tabulation. So whatever tabulation will we have made, this process of recategorization helps us to justify that tabulation. Now, the scores or the weightage, they are generally summated and they are recategorized on the basis of certain ranks. So you will be assigning certain ranks, like you may be a high rank or medium rank or a low rank, depending upon the recategorized recategorization. The basic principle in the process of categorization or recategorization is that the basic principle here in the process of categorization or recategorization is basically whatever categories are there, they must be obtained, um, uh, they must be which are obtained, they must be exhaustive, sorry, and they must be mutually exclusive. Okay, so they have to be independent. Whatever categories we are looking at of the data, they have to be independent, and at the same time, they have to be they should not be overlapping with other categories of data. Then tabulation is the next process in this entire analysis. So tabulation is basically whatever data we are the data we have got till now, and the processing that has taken place till now. We After categorization, we are going to present the data in the tabular form. So this tabular form is very important because this tabular form is actually going to help us to facilitate comparisons and then reflect the relations between the data. And it is basically tabulation means we will be arranging the data in rows and columns, and this will help us in performing some statistical operations on the data to draw inferences. Now, the tabulation can be in different forms, like it could be univariate tabulation, it could be, multivariate or bivariate, trivariate. There are different kinds of tables or tabulations which are there. And depending upon our requirement, we are going to choose the proper form of tabulation that has to be required. Now, after this comes the setting up of the analytic model. Excuse me. Now, this is basically when we begin the analysis of the data. As we have already seen, we have to look uh, into the objective of the research study. And depending upon the objective of the research study, we will be setting up the analytic models. Now, these are actually diagrammatic representation. Analytic models are actually diagrammatic representation of variables and their interrelationships. So it is just a diagrammatic representation of whatever variables we are having, and it also gives us the interrelationship between these variables. So they have given an example that life satisfaction is likely to be associated with socioeconomic status of the elderly. So this is a two variable. There are two variables. One is the socioeconomic status, and the second is the life satisfaction. And here, these relations between these two variables can be diagrammatically represented by this. They have given the diagrammatic representation between the two variables. And further, it is hypothesized that the bivariate relationship, bivariate means having two variables, relationship between the variables, they are affected by another variable or social support. So let us suppose that the social support has been categorized into three, namely high social support, medium social support, and the low social support. So accordingly, it will be described like this: social support when it is high, when it is medium, and when it is low. So this is the diagrammatic representation of the model, the analytic model which is given to us. Uh, The researcher, through this model, can proceed to analyze the data as discussed in the following section. So, this section will help us to understand how that analysis will be done. Now, in case of a univariate analysis, it's basically those tables which hold data relating to one variable. So, univariate tables have data related to one variable, and these are also known as a frequency distribution table. Okay, so they will show us how frequently an item is repeated. Okay, and example of frequency distribution they have given. This distribution can either be symmetrical or it can be asymmetrical, and the characteristic of the sample while examining the percentage and other properties of the distribution, it can be found out by various measures of central tendencies. Okay, so you have been given this table where they have given you the frequencies and the percentage, so how frequently that particular variable will occur, and the percentage has been given. So again, they have taken the same example which says a socioeconomic status and the distribution of respondents accordingly. So this is an example of a univariate table. Now, a frequency distribution of a single variable is the frequency of observation in each category of a variable. For example, they have said that the pattern of response of a variable socioeconomic status um, of respondents who belong to a high, medium, and a low socioeconomic status considerably. So they have given this example in the table. So when we want to analyze this data, what we are going to do, we are going to actually convert the frequencies into percentages. And based on these percentages, it will be easier for us to actually interpret the data meaningfully. Okay. Now, after the univariate analysis comes the bivariate analysis. Bivariate analysis is basically having two variables. So we will find out the relationship and of variables of data having two variables here. So just like a univariate table, you have this bivariate table here. So they have again given the socioeconomic status, life satisfaction here. And again, it is high, medium, low in both the variables. And here they have given the total. They have again converted into percentages. So this gives us an easy understanding of how we can interpret the table depending upon the number of variables. Now, the association between two variables, it can be easily explained either by comparing the percentage of the respondents column or column wise or row wise. So we will just understand that this association can be explained by comparing the percentage of respondents. Okay. So this can be done either column wise or it can also be done row wise. And the relationship between the variables can be examined by using various statistical techniques. Now, after this, we come to what is known as a trivariate analysis. Now, trivariate analysis is a similar thing, except that it will be having three variables here. Now, sometimes it may be it may be a case where the researcher might be interested in knowing whether there is a third variable also which is affecting the relationship between the two variables. So, in this cases, what will happen? The researcher will examine the bivariate relationship by controlling the effect of the third variable. And this can be done in two manners. Either one way of controlling the effect of the third variable is either to prepare the partial tables and examine the bivariate relationship. So, this can be done either by this, or the second method is assessing the effect of a third variable. Assessing the effect of the third variable can be done by comparing the coefficient of partial correlations. Now, these are statistical tools again, which can be used, and depending upon the number of variables that we are taken, we will also select the statistical tools accordingly. So here they have examined the trivariate relationship. So these are the ways in which you can easily find out the effect of the third variable on the given two variables. Now, this is basically correlation of coefficient, where this is a simple statistical tool. And now these are basically formulas which is given for each of these. So whenever when we are doing this, we will have to apply the formulas accordingly. Depending upon whatever statistical tool we are using, we will apply the formula. So here they are talking about coefficient of correlation. So we will be applying the that said formula. Now, after this comes a multivariate analysis. Multivariate, as the name suggests, it is based on multiple variables. Okay, so whenever there are three or more variables in questions, then we have to use a technique of multivariate analysis. And here, the most important statistical technique that we use for multivariate analysis is what is known as the regression analysis. Regression analysis is all about, how much the data is regressing from the mean. And it's the first step of multivariable analysis that they have to obtain the correlation between the variables which are having statistically significant correlation. And then these variables are put in the regression analysis. These the data must be measured on ratio or interval level here. And another thing that we have to keep in mind in this when we are using this technique is that these are based on certain assumptions. Hence, when we apply these techniques, the researcher has to see whether the sample which is selected by the researcher it fulfills the prerequisite conditions. So all of these different statistical tools, they have certain conditions which need to be fulfilled. So when we apply these statistical tools, we have to, understand, and also we have to also, make sure that those conditions are actually fulfilled before we apply that particular statistical tool to our analysis. After this, we come to the descriptive statistics. Now, descriptive statistics, we will be discussing two statistical methods. One is the measures of central tendency, and the second is the measures of dispersion. Now, these statistical tools are very important when we are doing the data analysis part. And now we come to the measures of central tendency. Now, measures of central tendency are actually simply they are called as average. Okay, so you have to take out the average of the values. Basically, what it means here. Now, there are different means or averages, three basically types of means. One is what is known as the arithmetic mean, the second is called as the median, and the third is called as the mode. Most common of them all is the arithmetic mean. Arithmetic mean is the most common of all the averages, and it is comparatively very easy to calculate. It is easy to understand also, and it is widely used in social work research because of its easy use. Now, otherwise, the arithmetic mean is defined as the ratio of the sum of the values of all the items and the total number of items. So basically, the value of the total number of items divided by the number of total of items is what arithmetic mean is all about. So we calculate mean arithmetic mean by following this formula. First, we will take the mid value of each class as representative of that class. Okay, and then we multiply the various mid values by their corresponding frequencies, and sum of the products is divided by the sum of the frequencies. Now it is already shown here. So you have these table where you have these two variables, the daily earning and the number of street children. So depending upon this, we will find out the mid values in each of these class. We have the number of street children. Then we are going to have the then we will find out the deviation from the assumed mean. Say it is 180. So we will calculate the deviation from the assumed mean, how less or how more the deviation is. And accordingly, we are going to apply this formula. And this is how we are going to find out the arithmetic mean. So basically, it is all about learning these formulas up, seeing what all these formulas, what all these values stand for, and then accordingly you will apply the data to the formula to the given data, and then that would be the whatever value we will get from applying the formula. We will simply uh, use it as the arithmetic mean for the data. Now, after the arithmetic mean, we come to the median. Now, median is also a very interesting and a very simple measure of central tendency. It is simply the middle position, you can say the middle item when data have been arranged or into a particular manner. Okay, so this is perhaps also the most important of all the positional averages that we have talked about till now. And it is basically, we define the medium as a size of the middle item when the items are arranged in ascending or descending order of the magnitude. So we are going to arrange the data in a particular manner. Either they will be arranged ascending in an ascending order, or they will be arranged in a descending order. And once they have arranged, we will find out the middle value of the data. This will give us the median. And this means that median divides a series in such a manner that there are as many items above or larger than the middle one as there are below or smaller than it. So we are going to arrange the items and then find out the median. So here they have given this table of how we can calculate the median from for a given uh, example. Now the formula for medium is simply given like this. So what you have to do is basically you have to enter the values pertaining to the formula given below, and finally after applying the different values, we can find out the median of the data. So this is again one very important average, you can say. After this, they have given us two examples over here. After this, another another average that is given to us is what is known as the mode. Mode is basically the value that is repeated the most number of times. So when we are given analyzing the data, we will find that there will be certain value which will be repeated the most number of times. So that value will give us the mode. Okay, and mode is located in the class where the frequency is the greatest. So where you will find the frequency the greatest, that is the class in which the mode will be present. And the mode is more useful where there are large number of cases and when data have been grouped. So whenever you have a large number of cases and where the data have been grouped, in these two situations, mode is the most widely used average. Now, this mode can be easily calculated through this manner. Now, we have been given the this again the formula for the mode. So we can apply this formula, and again we can find out the mode for a given set of data. So they have explained this by the table by this example where you're dealing with the monthly expenditure and the number of families. And then here we will find out the mode, which will be represented by the highest number of frequencies that are occurring in that particular class interval. Okay. So here we will be using the formula again for the calculation of mode. Now, after the means or the averages, we will come to the concept of measures of dispersion. Now, measures of dispersion is basically In research, sometimes we are interested in finding about the extent of homogeneity and heterogeneity among the respondents. That means the similarities as well as the differences, how different they are or how similar they are with respect to a given characteristic. So if we consider a set of data whose values are heterogeneous, that is, whose values are different, then such set of data is characterized by heterogeneity of values. So the extent to which they are heterogeneous or different vary among themselves is of very much importance when it comes to statistics. Now, it is measures of central tendency. It describes one important characteristic of a set of data typically, but it will not tell us anything about the other basic characteristics. So we always have to, we need ways of measuring the heterogeneity and the extent to which data are dispersed and the measures which provide this description. These are called as the measures of dispersion of variability. So it will help us to calculate the heterogeneity in the data that we come across. Now, this actually here the this diagram, it shows us the spread of the data. That is, to what degrees or to what extent the data has been spread. The wider the curve is, the more heterogeneous the data is, and so this will the more scattered the curve is. That means the scattered data gives you greater degree of heterogeneity. Now, important measures of dispersion here are range, quartile deviation, mean deviation, and standard deviation. So, in order to bring about study the heterogeneity and homogeneity, we can study through various measures of dispersion. Various measures of dispersions are range, quartile deviation, mean deviation, and the standard deviation. So, these are the four different measures of dispersion that we generally use when we are trying to um, understand the heterogeneity and the homogeneity in the data. So range is mathematically defined as a difference between the highest and the lowest values. Okay. So highest value minus the lowest value, whatever difference we get from this, that will give us the range. And so the only advantage of a range is that the measure then is seldom, the only advantage of range um, is that it can easily be calculated and it can be readily understood. So, of course, its calculation is very easy, and this makes it all the more easily understood. But it's generally not used much as measures of dispersion because it does not tell us anything about the dispersion of values. Okay, and specifically the values which are intermediate between the two extremes. So whatever values are intermediate between the two extremes of the data, the range will not tell us that value, and that is the reason why range as such is not a very widely used measure of dispersion. Now, up after range, another measure of dispersion that we use is the quartile deviation or the semi-interquartile range. Now, this is another measure of dispersion, and which is commonly known as a quartile deviation. Now, quartiles, as is given, it divides, these are the points which divide the series or the given values into four equal parts. And each of these will contain 25 of the items. So, 25 into 4, that will give us 100. So, the quartiles are then the highest value of each of these four parts. Interquartile range is the difference between the values of the first and the third quartile. Excuse me. So this semi-internal interquartile range or the quartile deviation, it can be found out from the given formula here. And we know that these interquartile is basically the difference between the first and the third quartile. So we get the quartile deviation through the above formula. Now, quartile deviation is the absolute measure of dispersion. That is, if quartile deviation is to be used for comparing the dispersion of series, and it is necessary to first convert the absolute measure to a coefficient of quartile deviation. So we have to first convert the absolute value to a coefficient of quartile deviation, and only then we can use the quartile deviation. Now, after this, we come to the mean deviation. Now, mean deviation is basically, uh, now we have seen that both range and the quartile deviation, they suffer from a serious setback. That is, they are calculated by taking into consideration only two values in a series. These two measures of dispersion are not based on all observation of the series. So that is why we say we just get to know the two values, the two extreme values. This is where the mean deviation comes into the picture. And in order to avoid this complication, generally the dispersion is calculated, taken into consideration all the observations of the series in relation to a central value. The method of calculating this dispersion is known as the method of averaging deviations or the mean deviation. So, technically speaking or mathematically speaking, it is the arithmetic average of the deviations of various items from a measure of the central tendency. Okay, so they have given this example here, and you will apply this by calculating the median of the distribution by using the above formula. So, this formula can be used to calculate the mean deviation. Now, after the mean deviation comes a coefficient of mean deviation. To compare the mean deviation of series, the coefficient of mean deviation or relative mean deviation is calculated first by dividing the mean deviation by that measure of central tendency about which the deviations were calculated. So we have this example here. So we have this formula which can be used to calculate the coefficient of the mean deviation, and then we can finally go to the standard deviation here. Standard deviation is the most frequently used of all the measures of dispersions, and generally standard deviation is nothing but it is the root mean square deviation about the mean. Now, the standard deviation is generally defined as the square root of the arithmetic mean of the squares of the deviation about the mean. So, symbolically, this is the formula which stands for the standard deviation, and any standard deviation can be calculated of the given values. So, they have given an example here where you can apply the formula and then calculate the standard deviation of the. Okay. Now, these are the various steps which have been given. How can you find out the standard deviation? So, we'll start with first finding the midpoints of the various classes. Once we find the midpoint, then we are going to assume a midpoint as an average and then take the difference of each midpoint from the assumed average and then divide by the magnitude of the class interval. Once that is done, the deviations are multiplied by the frequency of each class. Okay, and then we will find out the aggregate, we will square the deviation, and finally they will multiply by the respective frequencies. And the computed standard deviation, the standard deviation can be computed with the help of the formula given here. So after standard deviation, we come to another concept, that is the coefficient of variation. Now, the standard deviation, it represents measure of absolute dispersion, and it is also necessary to measure the relative dispersion of two or more distributions. So when the standard deviation is related to its mean, it measures a relative dispersion. So coefficient of variation, also known as the Karl-Pearson method, it is a simple measure of relative dispersion, which can be found out by this formula. So these are the various means of various statistical tools which can be used to interpret the data after the coding and the tabulation is done. Now, so basically here we have talked about the averages, okay, that is a central tendency, and then we have coefficient of deviations. So we have talked about these two statistical measures here, which help us in actually analyzing the data. After this, we will come to what is known as the inferential statistics. What exactly inferential statistics is meant. Now, in the till now, what we were doing is we were talking about the various descriptive statistics. That is the statistical method concerned with the description and analysis of a single variable. Okay. So, at times in research, we often have to find out the relationship between two or more variables in the data with one another. For instance, if we have to find out whether the expenditure on research and development is somehow related to the company's profits and so on. So, when there are two or more variables involved in this, and then we can use the inferential statistics. So, now the coefficient of correlation was introduced by Carl Pearson, and this coefficient of correlation is often referred to as a product moment correlation. Coefficient of correlation is calculated to identify the extent or the degree of correlation between two variables. So, as such, Carl Pearson's method of coefficient of correlation is a very important method which can be used here to find out the relationship between two or more variables. And this Carl Pearson's formula, coefficient of correlation, it can be easily calculated by using the formula which has been given here. So we have to calculate all these values and apply the formula if you want to get the Carl Pearson's correlation. Now, this is again something which we have to use when we are using the we have to find out the relationship between two or more variables. Okay, and this is the table that they have given in an example and how you can calculate the various values and apply those values. So first of all, we will assume the average of variable x and y, and then we will find the deviation of the items, okay, from the assumed averages. Then we will square up the deviations. We will find the product of deviation, and then we will find the aggregates. And then we will compute the correlation depending by putting the respective values in the formula above. Now, there is another method of coefficient of correlation by rank differences, which is known as a Spearman's method. Now, this is basically help us to calculate the coefficient of correlation when the direct quantitative measurement of the phenomena under study is not possible. Okay, so whenever we will find that the quantitative measurement of the phenomena, when we cannot directly find that, then this Spearman method is helpful in that. So the Pearson's coefficient of correlation between the ranks of two such traits is called as a rank correlations. And the formula of rank correlation has been given here. And where you have the row which denotes the coefficient of the correlation, rank correlation between the paired ranks, and D denotes the difference between the paired ranks, and N here stands for the number of pairs. So they have given this particular example here, and then we will apply the following formula and find out the Spearman's correlation. Now, another statistical tool which is used is known as the chi-square test. Now, the chi square test, it basically provides us with a method to evaluate whether or not frequencies which have been observed differ significantly from those which would be expected under a certain set of theoretical assumptions. For example, suppose categories of employees and preference of performance appraisal has been cross-classified, and the data summarizing in the following contingency table. Now they have given this table here, and based on the tables and the different values, we can find out the chi-square values, chi-square test values. So, in case of null hypothesis, we will compare the expected and the observed frequencies, and then we will find out the frequencies, the values by using the chi-square statistics by using this formula. Now, another concept here is known as a level of significance. Chi-square test is used to evaluate whether the difference between observed and expected frequencies is due to the sampling fluctuations, and as such insignificant, or whether the difference between is due to some other reason and as such significant. So this is basically the chi-square test is basically help us to evaluate and see whether the difference between the observed and the expected frequencies is significant or not. Now, before drawing the inference that is the difference is significant, researchers they set up a hypothesis, which is also often known as a null hypothesis. Okay, and this is in contrast with the research hypothesis. So, null hypothesis simply says that there is no relation between the two, or it does not affect the one does not affect the other. So, basically, usually, not always, null hypothesis states that there is no difference between the several groups or no relationship between variables, then the probability of the occurrence of such a difference is determined. So once we come up with a null hypothesis, we are going to prove or disprove the null hypothesis by finding out the difference of occurrence of those relationship. The probability it indicates the extent of reliance that we can place on the inferences drawn. So this is the level of significance which can be which can be calculated by drawing up a null hypothesis. After this, there's another concept which is known as a degree of freedom. Uh, to use a chi-square again, the next step is to calculate the degree of freedom. Here, the degree of freedom is basically when we so they have given this contingency table, 2 by 2 contingency table here, where the row and the column they have been given different assigned different values, and when we know the row and the column totals, then the number of degree of freedom can be defined as the number of cell values that one can freely specify. So we will have to come to these, calculate these cell values if we want to find out the calculate the chi-square test. So these values, the degree of freedom, can be calculated from the from the following formula above. Now, after this is another concept which is known as the regression analysis. Regression analysis is basically is an equation that relates the two variables mathematically. Equation for a straight line where the dependent variable y is determined by the independent variable x. So this is y is equal to a plus bx. Here they have given this. They've given an example where this table has been given to us, and using this formula, we can easily calculate the regression analysis. We can easily calculate the regression. That is how regression is basically to what extent the values is regressing from the normal. Now, after that, we come to the measures of difference. Now, measures of difference, for testing the measures of difference, we have the t-test and the paired t-test and the other such tables. Now, again, we may or may not get some questions which are directly pertaining to this, but it is important that at least for our own understanding, we should have a knowledge of these. Now, we may or may not use them at all during our research because, of course, a lot of times the statistical tool that we are using would be dependent upon the objective, the number of variables on the hypothesis, the number of variables that we are using in the hypothesis, and so that is going to actually define the type of statistical tool that we will be using. And in most of the researches, generally these tests may not be very relevant, but still it is important that at least we should know these different statistical tools. Now, parametric tests are basically known as the measures of difference. They are based on the assumption that the population is normally distributed, and these tests are use the higher measurement levels. Okay, like they will use intervals as well as the ratio. And the first is the t-test here. Now there are two types of t-test. One is called as a t-test for independent samples, and the other one is known as a paired t-test. The first test is used for the scores of one group and is independent of the scores of the other group. That is there is no logical relationship between the two scores that have been obtained from one group when compared with the another group. So this is where the t-test is used, or t-test for independent sample. Another one which is known as the paired t-test. Now they have explained this by the table above: performance scores of 10 social workers. Now, the t-test can be calculated by using the following procedures. First, we will find out the difference between the post-training and the pre-training scores. Okay. After that, we will compute the mean difference of the two. We will compute the square of the differences. We will find the sum of the square of differences, compute the sum of squares, find out the degree of freedom, compute the variance, compute t by using the formula given above. So we will be using the formula, and that is how we will compute the t-test. And when we calculate the t-test, we can say whether the null hypothesis has been rejected or it has been accepted, and whether there is actually a relationship between the two variables or not. Now, then there is a t-test for independent samples. It examines the difference between their means to see how close or apart they are. Okay, how close or apart the different samples are. So they have again tried to calculate this independent t-test for independent samples by using this particular example. And again, this is the total procedure of finding the t-test. Now, you have to simply understand the process by going through different the different steps that are used. So once you are able to actually calculate the different values, it can be simply found by uh, applying the values to the formula. So this formula is used for computing the t here. So it will help us to understand whether there is some significant differences or not in the performance of social workers in the two programs according to the question here. Now there is another tool which is the one-way analysis of variance, or ANOVA. Sometimes it is called, for short, it is known as the ANOVA. Now it determines whether there is a statistically significant difference between more than two sets of data on the basis of their means. Okay, and there are two variants that are calculated in the F test procedure. The first variance is obtained from the different groups, and the second variance is obtained from the values within each of the groups. Now they have taken an example here in order to find out the ANOVA, or the analysis of the variance. So here this is the procedure where we have to find out the squares of the scores of each of the three columns. You will find the sum of the values in each of the three columns, and similarly the sum of the squares. You are going to add the sum of the values of each of the three columns, and accordingly compute the summation of t square, and then compute the sum of the square of the total scores. After that, it can be done by computing the sum of the squares between the scores, and then the values can be put into the given formula, and then this can be easily find out. Now, the next important step that we have to um, understand after this is the testing of hypothesis, how the hypothesis testing is done. Now, first of all, there are various steps that are involved in testing the hypothesis. Now, we have already seen what a hypothesis is. Okay, that is a statement that we want to prove or disprove. Okay, what we are trying to prove or disprove in our research. So, first of all, we will state the research hypothesis. Whatever our research hypothesis is, we're going to state the research hypothesis. We are going to formulate the null hypothesis, stating that there is whatsoever no difference between the two variables. Accordingly, depending upon the choice of variables, the number of variables, we are going to choose a statistical test. So, whatever statistical test we have seen till now, we are going to choose the appropriate statistical test depending upon the research design and the objectives, as well as the variables. We are going to choose a statistical test. We are going to specify a significance level. We will compute the statistical test, and then we will finally reject or accept the null hypothesis. Once we reject or accept the null hypothesis, we are going to draw the inference about the research hypothesis. So once the null hypothesis has been proved or disproved, that will help us to draw the inference about a research hypothesis. So here they have given an example where we want to find out the research hypothesis that employee salary and level of job satisfaction are likely to be interdependent. That means that if the salary is high, there seems to be a greater job satisfaction uh, uh, of the employees. Then we are going to formulate the null hypothesis, saying that they are not linked to each other; they are independent. Then accordingly we are going to choose a statistical test, so depending upon whatever it deem fit. Either we can use the difference the different statistical tests. Maybe if we choose a chi-square test or a t-square test, whatever, we are going to specify the significant level. After that, then we will compute the statistical test. We will cross tabulate this data and compute the chi-square test. We will compute the statistical test, and based on that, we are going to either reject or accept the null hypothesis. So when the calculated value of chi-square is more than the critical value, we say that the null hypothesis can be rejected. That means that our research hypothesis can be accepted, that there is definitely a great deal of relationship between the salary and the satisfaction of the employees. So they are interdependent, not independent. So here we have talked about the various statistical tools. We have talked about the descriptive statistics, and we have also talked about the inferential statistics. How the null hypothesis can be calculated. We have seen the different steps of calculating the null hypothesis, and how the test hypothesis can be tested, the research hypothesis can be tested, the various ways of testing the research hypothesis. Then we come to the final unit, which is the reporting of the research. Now, this is the most important part in the research, because whatever research we have carried out, whatever work that has been done till now, the whole thing is going to depend upon the report of the research, because this is the report which is going to be presented before either the committee, the research committee, or it will be finally submitted with all the work that has been there. So it is very important that the research report is written with great deal of precision and clarity, and also we are able to actually present the facts of the research clearly through our report. So in this unit, basically we will try and understand why it is important to write a research report, why we are writing a research report in the first place. We are going to understand the main components of the research report. There are different components of in the research report. So we are going to understand these components, we are going to describe the components, and finally we will write the final report. Uh, Include the various important aspect, like how do we start, do the beginning, write the beginning of the report, how we write the main body, and finally the end of the report. So all of these would be discussed in this particular unit. Now the first question is, why do you have to write a research report in the first place? So now it is important to understand that once we have completed our research project, we are expected to write the report. Okay. And a research report is basically a very precise presentation of the work which is done by the researcher while investigating a particular problem. So this research report. It consists of all the work, a presentation of all the work that is being done by the researcher, and whether the study is conducted by an individual researcher or a team or by an institution, the findings of the study, it should be represented by the research report. And there are several reasons. First of all, the people learn more about the area of the study. So people are going to definitely know the area of the study. The discipline is going to be enriched with new knowledge and theories. So if you're carrying out research in whatever discipline, whether it is social work, whether it is psychology, sociology, definitely the research report is going to add to the existing knowledge of literature. So it helps us to enrich the knowledge and theories. The researchers and practitioners in the field, they can apply, test and retest the findings already arrived at. So our findings, whatever findings we have got from our research studies, it can be used as baseline research for other researchers and practitioners who can carry forth the research uh, in the related uh, discipline, in the related area. Now, other researchers, they can also refer to the findings and then they can utilize the same for further research. And these findings, they can be utilized and implemented by the policy makers or those who had sponsored the project. So normally research is generally done where the findings of the research can be used for some practical purpose. So either it can be used by the agency who is sponsoring the research, or it can be used even by the you can say the policy makers in order to apply it. Now, the final report of the research, it takes a variety of forms. Now, for example, a research report which is funded by an educational institution may be in the form of a written document. Okay, so either it can be in the form of a written document, which is generally a research report which is funded by an educational institution. A report may also take the form of an article in a journal or a research report of the student for various degrees. It can take the form of thesis or dissertation. So there are three forms in which a research report can take place. Either it can take the form of a written document, either it can take the form of an article or a thesis or a dissertation. Now, here the entire research report, that is divided into three major divisions, that is the beginning part, the main body, and the end part. Okay. Now, the beginning part of the research report, it consists of the cover or the title page, which will have um, the title of the research. Okay, it will have the second cover, it will have acknowledgements, the contents will be there, the list of contents, and the list of tables. So, the beginning part of the research, the report, will have all these different aspects. Then comes the main body, where you will have the introduction part, introduction about the research that has been carried out. The review of literature will be there, the research methodology is there, analysis and interpretation of the data will be there in the main body, main findings and conclusions will be there, and a summary will be there. And finally, towards the end of the research report, you will have the bibliography and the references and the appendices, which would include the questionnaire or the schedule which has been used by the researcher to obtain the data. So now we will come to the beginning part of the research. This is very crucial to the entire work. Why? Because it will give you the introduction to your research. So it will be more or less in this order, where you will have the cover or the title page, which will give you the beginning of this will be given in the beginning of the report. And now the different universities and colleges, they may be having their own format how to present the title page. But generally, you will have the title of the topic which is there. You will have the relationship of the report to a degree, course, or organizational requirement. So whether you want to, in pursuance of a PhD degree or fulfillment of an MA degree or MSW degree, whatever, depending upon that. Then we will have the name of the researcher, the name of the supervisor who has been supervising the research, and the name of the institution where the report is to be submitted. So if it's a university or whatever, then you will have the name of the institution to which the report is to be submitted, and the time of the submission, the year or the month and the year of submission. The title page also, it carries a concise and adequately descriptive title of the research study. So this title should briefly convey what the study is all about. Okay. Now, for example, these are the different. Here, they have a few examples of titles of the research reports and doctoral thesis here. Like they have given sometimes the researchers, they are not able to actually give a very suitable title to the research. And as such, the title of the research should be said that it should be self understood. Like the person who reads the title should be able to understand what actually this research study is all about. What does it intends to study? So having a very clear title which includes all the various aspects under study, that is very important. The title would always be written in bold letters, okay, and upper bold letter case, and they should be placed in the central portion of the top of the cover page. Okay, so we will be having this. This is an example of the title page of the research report that has been there. Then after the title page, you will have the preface or the acknowledgement. Now, the preface is basically it should include the reasons why the topic was selected by the researcher. So, why the researcher has selected the particular topic? It may explain the history of the research, the scope of the research, the methodology, and the researcher's opinion about the study. Okay, and it should be in continuation or it should be written separately. Now it records acknowledgement, like whatever, if you want to give thanks to the different people that have helped you in carrying out that particular study, that would all come under the acknowledgement part. Okay. And the acknowledgement part should be non emotional and it should be very simple. Next come the table of content, where we will be talking about the logical division of the report into various sections and subsections. So the different sections that we have included and the different subsections that we have included. Okay, for the research purpose, we are going to write that in the table of contents. So they have given a sample of how this is there, how this table of content has to be written. The acknowledgement is there, the table of contents, list of tables, the different chapters, the into which the research has been divided, starting with introduction, and then going on to the research methodology, the profile of the respondents, the organizations for the disabled, and evaluation of the services. So they have just given an example of how you can write the table of contents. And they will always have the page number against every list of the different chapters. So whenever you're writing the table of content, you also have to include the page numbers from which that particular part of the research is covered. So the different chapters along with their page numbers, they would be written like this. After that, we will come to the list of the tables. So this list of the tables and the different tables that you have incorporated in your research, they would be written, and a list will be made for each table, and the page on which that particular table is given, that will also be mentioned. So this gives an easy access of the various tables. This because it is the data will be the entire analysis of the data is made on the basis of the table. Okay, and that is why this is very important, because it will help us to understand the various tables that are there in the research report and the page number against each table. After that, we will also give a list of the figures and the illustrations. So if we have drawn any figures, if we have drawn any other illustrations, maybe it can be some other apart from table, there may be some other graph or a bar diagram or a pie chart or whatever. If we have used any kind of a diagram or an illustration maybe, then we can include that separately in the list of the figures and the illustrations here. Now they have given this example of the various list of figures that is there, and again the page number against the figure will be there. After that is the glossary. The glossary is basically a short dictionary which will explain the technical terms that you have used throughout the research. So, if there are particular technical terms that have been involved in the research, then maybe a glossary can be made, which would, in short, define the terms that have been used. So this is an example of how they have written in the glossary. The various technical terms used in the research can be written in glossary. They can be explained in the glossary. Now, after this, we will talk. After this, we will also draw a list of the abbreviations. Many a times, we will find that some kind of abbreviations may also be there in the research. So you have to make a list of all these abbreviations that have been used frequently, so that it is important to understand that the abbreviations that we have used actually mean what. Okay, so this is a example of how an abbreviation list can be made. Now, after the introduction part, we come to the main body. Now, the main body is represents the actual work of the researcher, okay, or the investigator. It tells us very clearly about the investigation study from the beginning to the end. Okay, so the methodology section of the final report, it should be written in the past tense because we have already completed the study here. At this stage, the study has been completed. So we would be writing the methodology in the past tense. Now, we have to avoid any kind of an unnecessary details here or loose expressions, and we will include these points when we go to the main body. So, first of all, will be the introduction part. The second would be the review of literature part. Excuse me. The third part would be the research methodology. Then is the research. After research methodology comes the analysis and interpretation of data. Thereafter, you will have the major findings, conclusions, and discussions, and finally the summary. Now, again, what we have to take into close at consideration are the style of writing, the design, and the placement of references under footnotes. So, all of these they have to be carefully planned when we are writing the research report. Now, here we will talk about the various chapterizations, why different chapterizations are required, and what are the functions of those chapterizations. So, the first part would be the introduction part. Okay. Now, this introduces the topic or the problem under investigation, why this particular problem is important. So, now this particular chapter will give us a theoretical background to the specific area of investigation. So, if we are investigating maybe the say any problem related to old age, or maybe you are investigating any problem related to juvenile delinquency, then you are going to discuss the problem, you are going to discuss the theoretical background to that specific area of investigation, what exactly is what exactly the investigation area is all about. You are going to state the problems under investigation with specific reference to its placement. Okay. Then also, this part will describe the significance of the present problem, why that problem is important, and the reason why it has been considered for this particular study. Okay. We will also be defining the important terms here which has been used in investigation and its reporting. We will state the objective of the study. So, what objectives of the study were included? We will also state precisely the important terms which are used in the study that would be tested through statistical analysis of data. So, whatever important terms that were used during the statistical analysis of data, we are going to state those terms. We will define the scope and limitation of the investigation. So, whatever scope of the investigation or limitation of the investigation has been. We are going to state all these in the introduction part. So this is the first part, which will be the introduction part. Now, after this, we come to the review of literature part. Now, review of literature is basically, you can say, uh, the it will include the abstraction of the earlier research studies and other theoretical articles and papers. Okay, so here we are going to write abstracts about what all other researches that have already happened in this particular area. So if you are talking about, say, maybe if you are doing a research on juvenile delinquency, some aspect of juvenile delinquency, then you are in the literature review, you are going to write an abstraction about the various different studies that were taken place on that particular aspect of juvenile delinquency. So they may include a review of articles, they may also review other researches or dissertations or theses. It may also be a review of some journal article, a paper presented or whatever. So, whatever literature review you have done, it may be even a book review of a book. So, whatever review that you have done for that particular topic, you are going to write the summation of that, just a gist of the different reviews done. Now, this has two functions. First of all, while selecting a problem area or simply a topic, the researcher, it goes through many books, journals. So there are a lot of secondary data that we have to go through. Okay, when we are talking about selecting a problem to finally formulate the problem. So the review of literature is the first task for a research in order to decide on a problem. So whenever we have to finally formulate a problem relating to our research, we have to first review the literature, and that would help us to formulate the theoretical framework. Secondly, such a review, it helps the researcher to formulate the broader assumptions about the factors involved in the problem, and these can be later developed to form the hypothesis of the study. So that is why literature review is very important. And the review, it also indicates the researcher's grasp over this area. So the more review we do about the various data which is already available, or the secondary data that is already available, this will help us to grasp the area that we want to study. So while reviewing literature, the in the area concerned, you have to keep in mind that the whatever literature we have reviewed, it has to be critically analyzed and summarized in terms of agreements and disagreements among the authors and researchers. So it would be basically a more critical analysis, a kind of a critical analysis of the literature. So here, researchers generally, it is seen that researchers may make two types of errors in their review exercises. Many a times, what researchers do, they simply report the findings of one study after another in a sequence order without showing how the findings are connected with each other. So we have to ensure that whatever studies we are taking up for review, we should be able to indicate the interconnectedness between those different studies, and other report on studies that are at best only marginally selected to their own hypothesis. So sometimes what happens, many researchers, they simply report the findings of one study after another without showing this interconnectedness. The design of a study is usually described in the third chapter of the report. So uh, once we describe the data, the review of literature, we are going to the next chapter would include the describing the design of the study. So this will be all about the research methodology, where will you be describing the research methodology. You will write about the variables that you are using, so the various independent variable, dependent variable, and any other intervening variables. Okay, that will be discussed along with the operational definitions. We will also see how the sampling will be done. What type of sampling are we going to? So, are we going for a probability sampling, or we are going for a non-probability sampling? Here, we're going to discuss the sampling process in detail. Then, the listing and describing the various tools and techniques used in the study. That will also be discussed, like maybe we use questionnaires, attitude scales, etc. Whether these have been adopted or developed by the investigator, their reliability, validity, item description, administration, scoring, all of these things will be included here. And finally, we will be describing the statistical techniques which have been used in the analysis of data. So, what type of statistical tool are we using for analysis of the data? Okay, so that would be described. So, all of these will be described in this particular part of the research report. The next part would be the analysis and the interpretation of the data, which is basically the heart of the whole report, and it will include the outcome of the report. So the collected data here is presented in a tabular form. So we are going to present the data in a tabular form, and then we are going to analyze with the help of a statistical techniques. Okay. So the data will be tabulated. It will be analyzed by use of statistical technique, and if it is required, the findings may also be presented graphically, although that is not something which is important, but findings may or may not be presented graphically. The figures do not necessarily repeat themselves, but the data present visually for easy understanding and easy comparison. So that is why this tabulation is generally done, because the huge data that is there in the report, it can be easily understood, and the various values can be easily comparison. You can draw easy comparisons about the values. Now, here we know that the data may be presented in parts under relevant sections. So the analysis not only includes the actual calculations, but you also have to include the final result here. And in each stage of the analysis of the objective, the study of their coverage is taken care of. So this chapter will present in details the various testing of each hypothesis and the conclusions arrived at. So basically, the presentation, tabulation, and presentation of data in graphical format. Then you have the use of different statistical tools, and finally the arrival at various conclusions. All of these will be done at during in this particular part of data interpretation. Then we come to the major findings and conclusions. Now, this is generally the fifth chapter in a research report, where the major findings of the study is analyzed and interpreted in the preceding chapter. They are precisely and objectively stated in this chapter. Now, the fourth chapter, it contains such presentations as only a trained researcher can understand. But if you're looking at a person who is not trained for statistics, or maybe if you want to make it to the just show it to a beginner or maybe to a layman, then in that case you have to write about the major findings that are presented in a non-technical language, so that it can be easily understood by people who are not very good at statistical analysis. Now, the main findings will be followed by discussions on the results or the findings. So, whatever findings we have, come at through the various interpretation and inference, we will be writing a little bit about the discussions. We will be writing discussions or doing a discussions about the findings. Now, the major findings are matched against the findings of other related research works, okay, which have already been reviewed in the second chapter of the report. So this consists of the research review, and accordingly, the hypothesis is formulated in the first chapter. They are either confirmed or disregarded. So whatever hypothesis we have formulated, we are going to actually either accept the hypothesis, or we are going to reject the hypothesis. And accordingly, um the null hypothesis would also be either rejected or it would be accepted. So, depending upon the acceptance or rejection of the null hypothesis, our research hypothesis will be accepted or rejected. Now, if the findings do have any discrepancy in comparison with those of the other researchers, or if the findings do not explain sufficiently the situation or problem under study, or if they are adequate for generalizations, explanations with proper justification and explanation have to be provided. So, in case if our study gives any kind of a different, scenario where they are totally different from what has been the case in the earlier studies, then we have to actually justify that, by we have to give proper justification and explanation as to why this discrepancy is arising in our particular study. Excuse me. Now, these implications, they should suggest some kind of activities, for and provide some direction to the practitioners in the field. So this can be actually used as giving direction to the practitioners who may take up their the research further. And these are the implications. They follow a presentation or listing of the limitations of the study, on the basis of which suggestions are made to carry out further investigations. So, we may in this particular part we may also present the or list out the limitations of our study. So, if there were any limitations in the study, whether we were not able to cover particular aspect of the area, or also what all suggestions the researcher has to give for investigators who will be carrying out the investigation further. So we can actually mention this aspect as well in this inference part. And then finally we can include a research summary along with the research report. It is basically the last part, where we pull out the report. As we pull out of the report itself, it sums up. Basically, it will be a summation of the entire summary of the entire work that we have done, of the entire report. And we are just going to sum up precisely the whole of the research report, right from the theoretical background to the suggestions for further study. Now, this is how the various research report can be, the various parts of the research report can be written. And the last part here, as we have discussed, is a summary, which is nothing but just a summary of, or just a brief summary of the whole research. Now, there are certain points that we need to consider when we are talking about the writing style of the research. Okay. The style of writing a research report is definitely different from writing other reports. A report should be very concise, first of all. It should be very concise, it should be unambiguous, easy to understand, and it should be presented very meaningfully. Okay. This presentation needs to be simple, it needs to be direct, and use of short sentences is preferable. The language should not be dull or demotivating. This is something which we need to take special attention. And the statements should be precise as possible. They should be objective, and there should be no room for subjectivity or any kind of a personal bias. Similarly, any kind of overgeneralization with regard to that particular area must be avoided. Okay. Any kind of slang expressions or flippant phrases, they should be avoided at all cost. Writing style should be such that the sentences should not try to convince or persuade the reader. Now, since the report describes what has already been completed, the writing should be in the past tense. So, whatever we are writing, it should be written in the past tense, because we should understand that the report is about the research that was carried out. And since we have already carried out the research, we are going to write the whole report in past tense. Now, in case of citations, very special, consideration should be taken. It should be very much done according to the according to the whatever institution style of referencing or citation has been accepted by the institution. And in all cases, the name of the authors in the name of the authors title should be avoided. We just write the names without writing the titles here. Okay. And then there are different ways in citation styles that are accepted by different organizations. So depending upon the organization in for which you are carrying out your research, or presenting your research, forwarding your research, you have to accept the citation style. Mostly the APA or the American Psychological Associations, generally the APA style of citation is followed. Although there are some other styles also, like the Harvard citation style is there, and many other citation style is there. And different organizations have accepted different citation style. So you need to check out with your organization the kind of citation style that they are using, and then you will be citing the authors accordingly. Now, language and the grammar usage is very important here. Special need to special care should be taken whenever we are using grammar. And nowadays you have a self-correcting um, uh, uh, softwares here like MS Word that will help you, that gives you a good support when it comes to spelling and grammar. There are certain other good softwares and other programs like Grammarly is there. Then you can use autocorrect or auto summarize, thesaurus. All these software can be used in order to autocorrect your language and your spellings and grammar. Now, these features in the MS Word itself should be, used, and these are very much error free. And it is always advisable to show the report to other people, maybe to the supervisor or to another colleague or a friend who can give some kind of expertise on the for corrections before it is finally typed. And it is always suggested to go through multiple readings of the research report before finally submitting. This will help you to come up with any kind of a discrepancy in the report, or any kind of error in terms of grammatical or spelling error. Now, references, they must be included at the end of the research report. These will include articles or papers, book chapters or monographs, etc. They must always be quoted inside the text and should always accompany the relevant references. So, again, as said, that depending upon the style of citation, we will cite the references. Nowadays, what is also used is, instead of using these references at the end of the research report, nowadays researchers have started using these references at the end of every chapter. So, whatever references you're using for different chapters, they can be used at the end of every chapter. And finally, at the end of the research report, you can include a whole bibliography along with the references, along with the full references. So it makes the work all the more effective and easy to understand, and also it gives more credibility to your work. So basically, now they have also given some of the important abbreviations which can be used as footnotes and bibliographies. Nowadays, earlier there used to be, a lot of inclusion of footnotes, but nowadays, usually footnotes are not written. So, but that would depend from, organization to organization. You have to check out with your organization the kind of, a style that they are using. So these are the different abbreviations that can be used. They have given a list of different abbreviations that can be used for the research report writing. So any kind of overwriting or strikeovers or erasures, insertions, they are not very advisable. Before typing, it is important to check whether the handwritten report is in proper shape. Okay, so whether the pages are in proper order, whether it has been written clearly. So the typist, if you're getting the work done by the typist or by the researcher himself or herself is doing it, you should be able to comprehend the manuscript. So this will make the typing easy and error free. And now they have also seen that they have also written that any crammed manuscript should be avoided, and only one side of the paper should be typed, and typing should be double spaced. Okay, so spaces should be left on each side of the paper as followed. So the arrangement of these margins should be done accordingly. Now, whenever there you are using some lengthy quotations, it should be indented and it should be typed in a single space. And at the end of each line, verse should be divided as per convention. Okay, then for any lengthy quotation, short quotation of 3 or 4 lines may be included in the text within the quotation marks. So if you are using something verbatim, it should be done within inverted commas, and special care has to be taken nowadays specifically for those people who are submitting their research work in the form of thesis or dissertations, because nowadays there is a lot of stress on specifically on using any kind of similarity check is done before the thesis or dissertation is approved. So much care has to be taken, and these proper using proper commas and using inverted commas, it helps you to actually overcome any kind of disagreement over these over the similarity issues. Now now it is always good to prepare the report on a computer, and there are several advantages that they have already given. So you can just go through it. Now the tables and figures need to be again placed where you are placing the tables and figures. That is very much important. Generally it should be placed on one specific page, so one page should be having only one particular table. It does not make it does not give a very crammed look, and it also does not confuse the reader. And the table should be accompanied by the textual material, so you should be able to actually explain whatever has been presented on the table as well as on the diagram. And also it must be properly the table must be properly you should be having a numbering. So the tables must be properly numbered, so that when you're making a list of tables in the first introduction part, that should come handy. And if the table is too large and it is continues on the next page, then the table title should be repeated in this next part also, in the second page also. Now many times we are also using different figures. These also must be represented in the graphic form. So whatever other figures we are using, like charts or photographs or drawings, graphs, diagrams, etc., these must be represent. These are help us to represent the data in a visual form. These materials must not be repeated through figures unless it is very necessary. So the textual material should not be repeated. And one important point is that the figures, it should be very much easy to understand, and they must be properly numbered, okay, and they should be precisely explained. So this helps us to uh, basically understand the diagrammatic representation of the data. Now, after this, the body part, we come to the end part of the research report. This generally consists of the what is known as the references and appendix or appendices. References is basically come at the end of the after the last chapter of the report. And as I've already said that nowadays they have changed the concept of bit, and nowadays researchers, they have started using references after the end of every chapter. So that can also be done specifically when you are writing for a thesis or a dissertation. References can be given after the end of each chapter for that particular chapter, and a common reference can be given at the end of the research report, okay, which will also include the other appendix or appendices depending upon whatever you want to. So there can be other things like, the you will have whatever questionnaire or interview schedule or whatever tests you have used in order to gather the data, you can attach with the references. Now, the research report present both bibliographies and references, although many times the researchers use these terms interchangeably, they have definite meaning. Now, a bibliography is a list of titles that may or may not have been referred to in the text of the research report. Okay, so you may suggest different books in the bibliography. Okay, but you may not have actually used those reports or books in your own research, but they can still be written in bibliography. And references include only such studies that have been actually referred to in the research report. So generally, books which are meant for larger circulation, which may be listed in bibliographies, okay, and the books that have been referred to in your research report will be included as part of the references. So again, there are different styling of the citations, as we've already said. We have already discussed in the previous. You have the APH style of citation, the Chicago manual style is there. Then there are other styles also. The Harvard style is there, but usually the Chicago style and the APA style, these are the most commonly accepted styles of citations that are used. And you can easily see the kind of style of referencing that can be done. So generally in the style of referencing, we may arrange the references in alphabetical order, okay, or we may arrange the references in a sequence as they appear in the text of the research report. So however we want to do that, we can do that. It is always easier to actually arrange the references in what do you call that, alphabetical order. It is also easy to find out also, but anyways we may arrange the references according to the other style also. Both are acceptable. So they have given an example of how this different references or different citations of authors can be done. Now, apart from this, any kind of other material that is used by the researcher in terms of the web-based documents or citing emails or a website, these can again they have to be cited as per this. And nowadays we also, whenever we use so this. whenever we use website also, then we must also include the day access date, like when we have accessed that particular website. Because sometimes what happens, the website may take off the content from that particular site. So accession date should be always mentioned whenever we are mentioning the website for our research work. So these can be this is how various uh, uh, you know uh, data sources can be cited in your researches. At the end of it, you also have the certain appendices, which will consist of the true copies of the tools which we have used. In terms of important statistical calculations or photographs or charts, which cannot be used inside these texts. As we have said, the whatever questionnaire or the interview schedule or whatever tests and other things that we have used for our research work, we may include as part of the appendix. So, this is all about the data processing and analysis. So, these 4 days we have discussed everything about research that is important for a social worker to understand in terms of understanding the concept of social scientific research, the scientific process of research, how social work or research in social sciences is different from the research in other physical sciences. We have also discussed the various researches, the types of researches. We discussed the quantitative research and the qualitative research. We have discussed the various research designs in terms of, whether we are looking at a experimental design or a quasi-experimental design, whether we are talking about applied research, all of these types of designs of research we have studied. We have also tried to understand the various stages of doing research, the various steps of doing research. What are the major steps that are involved in the research processes, in the research process? Finally, the data, that the how the data is can be obtained in terms of the various tools and techniques for data collection. We have also talked about the various apart from the tools and techniques, we have also discussed about the various statistical tools and techniques that can be used to finally analyze the data. And before that, how we can represent the data graphically, why it is important to graphically represent the data, what advantages it has. And the last part was dealing with the formulation of the research report, the various aspects of research reports, the various paths. And so this brings us to the end of the on our presentations on the research methods. I hope that this 4 days of classes were helpful for you to understand how research in social work is carried out. And uh, is there any question or any kind of this thing which is from any of the students? Any query? Any question?
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes.
Is there assignment in 100 marks, research work and
Yeah, the assignments are of
006
100 marks each. Yes, yes. You can
after
access the Yeah, you can access the assignment for online only. It is there
okay.
in the website. Yeah, it is given in the website. So you can access the assignment